Hello and welcome to Conversations from the Adoption and Fostering podcast. In this episode, Damian shares his story and experience as an adult adoptee. Damian describes how he made sense of his adoption, his reluctance to search for his biological parents, and his recent contact with his birth family. This is a personal account with personal views, and we hope you find it thought-provoking and interesting. And if you'd like to share your perspective or experience, then please do direct messages at our Twitter feed or on our Facebook page.
I'm Damian. I was born in 1973 and was given up for adoption 8 days after I was born. I was fostered for the first 5 weeks of my life and then adopted at 6 weeks old. And I've had an amazing life from that point on until 1995 when I started experiencing anxiety and depression symptoms out of the blue, and with some therapy and CBT, it kind of uncovered issues surrounding adoption, which I'd always kind of denied and felt wasn't an issue, but it suddenly bubbled up and became an issue, or something that I was aware of.
Can I ask, was adoption something you were always aware of? Was there a moment?
My adoptive mother, she told me I was adopted from before I could even understand English. She practiced telling me. She remembered, telling me when I was in a pram, in a pushchair, that I was adopted. So it's something I've always known, from the point of being able to understand. And I've always seen them as my parents, my adoptive parents as my parents. I've never felt of them as anything different. There's a kind of acceptance in me. I think for the first 6 weeks of my life after being given up for adoption, apparently I cried solidly. Then when I was adopted, I stopped crying and virtually didn't cry until I was in my 20s. So I was always aware of being adopted, yeah.
And you talked about, we were chatting before, but reflecting on them, you had a few interesting comments as you was a teenager.
As I sort of became a teenager, like everybody does, they sort of become rebellious against their parents. But mine wasn't necessarily rebellious. It was sort of acting out some kind of, it was almost acting out some kind of resentfulness, some anger. And I never knew where it was coming from. I would have a burst of anger and outrage, sort of normally surrounding, you don't understand me, or you're not listening to me, you're not hearing or understanding what I'm trying to say. And I didn't even know what it was. So I was acting out some kind of deep down, some sort of emotion that kept bubbling up. And I think for a long time it was a sense of, I was just rebelling. But what I was actually doing was I was probably acting out my anger towards my my biological mum. It was a sort of sense of fearing rejection, but almost instigating rejection.
Mm-hmm.
That sense of being given away at birth, not knowing necessarily why, and the only people I could sort of act that out in that sort of anger and frustration, that sort of not knowing, was to my adoptive parents, which, God bless them, they were amazing, but they just didn't know how to handle that. They didn't know what to do with it. And in turn, that kind of, in hindsight, they would have probably put me in therapy, a lot sooner, and we may have uncovered things. But maybe at the time I wasn't ready to actually accept that was the reason why. I think from being able to understand that I was adopted, I accepted it, but also it went into a folder that labelled denial.
Right.
A little bit like, yes, I'm adopted, forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. Every time I spoke about being adopted to anybody, as a child, telling school friends, it always felt, and has always felt, that I was talking about somebody else. I was speaking about the third person. in a conversation, I'd be having the conversation with somebody about being adopted right into adulthood, and it always felt like I was speaking about another child that wasn't me. And now I kind of realised that was denial. That was my inability to actually connect and own the fact I was adopted.
Did it mean anything? Because it's language. Or you're adopted. When was the moments where you started to understand what that meant, and was there a narrative that was given to you around what that meant, but also why that had happened?
I think the first actual memory I have of it was I'm guessing around 4 or 5 years old, and I suddenly developed this real fear that something was going to happen to my adoptive parents. I developed a very negative feeling that something was going to happen, and I can remember saying to my mum, my adoptive mum, I don't want you to die. I don't want you to die. I don't want you to leave me. So it was around 4 or 5. I'd been in hospital for a routine operation as a child, and in there I felt very, very alone, very, very scared. And I came out of there feeling a kind of a desperate need to hold on to them.
Mm.
A desperate need to hold on to them. And strangely, a desperate need to protect them, even as a very small child, a very strong need to protect them. If I was walking down the street, I would want to walk on the outside of the pavement to protect my mum. If a car had happened to come onto the pavement or something, and it's something I do to this day. With everybody, I have this need to protect them and almost preserve them, and so they can't leave me almost.
And what did your adoptive parents, make of that? Did they see that? Or was that something that you kept to yourself?
I think they just saw that as a trait, as a sort of a trait. He's just very protective. He's just very loving and very. As a child, I was very affectionate, and I was surrounded with love. My grandparents very loving towards me. I had arguably an idyllic childhood. I had amazing opportunities, amazing life. On the surface, everything was wonderful, and I think everybody just thought it was sort of just my personality, just my traits. Coming out as a very caring, very sort of thoughtful child. It never really appeared to be a problem or to be anything to discuss,
Mm-hmm.
I think even back then I became an expert at suppressing my real feelings and being a people pleaser, essentially, just getting on with things. And very early on in life, at the age of about 5 or 6, I sort of expressed interest in music, and I became a little entertainer of sorts, sort of enjoy playing the keyboard at home, and mum and dad encouraged that.
Yeah.
And that kind of then defined me. It kind of became Damian, the little entertainer who went on to be a professional musician and have a great career. And that was, that kind of took priority over everything almost. Mm-hmm. That I was not only an entertainer, but a people pleaser, and somebody who made everybody else happy, but not necessarily addressed my own sort of emotions or issues.
And I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? We can look back with sort of 2020 or a version of 2020. And do you see all that intrinsically linked now with your sort of early life, that experience of separation of, you describe 6 weeks of crying, and then
yes.
That, which is quite when you start to unpick that, that's quite a lot that, then you move into your adoptive parents, which I'm sure as your parents would have gone, that's great. He's happy. Mm-hmm. But you could interpret that a different way, couldn't you?
You could interpret that as he's almost gone mute. He's kind of shut down, which I guess is actually what happened. when I was given up for adoption, when I was given, my adoptive parents were given some notes about my biological parents and family, and in those it was very specific. He cried, and in fact the doctors were reluctant to let me be put up for adoption because they thought there was something wrong with me, because I cried so much I was holding my breath and I was actually turning blue.
So that's more than that, because when you initially said it, I thought, well, babies cry, and so but that's something different, isn't it?
Yeah, this was to the point of becoming disturbing. It's constant and very extreme, and to be sort of mentioned in the note, if you like. I always refer to them as the Cabbage Patch notes. You remember the Cabbage Patch dolls that you would adopt? I always, affectionately refer to them as Cabbage Patch notes, and that's what really stood out for those 6 weeks. And I think when at that point you are adopted, you get some sense of comfort, but I think there is a sense of almost you give in. You've cried yourself to the point of despair, and then that's it. You've got no more crying left. You just go quiet.
Yeah.
And, it's just, and I was sort of stayed quiet for many, many years.
Yeah, I mean that's a really profound statement, isn't it? You stayed quiet for many years.
Yeah, I looking back now, that's it is profound, because as you unfold, as your life unfolds, you try not to overanalyze things, and you try not to you live in the moment and live. But looking back, it is profound. That sort of going quiet and remaining quiet was almost became a deliberate habit, because it avoided touching nerves. It avoided upsetting myself or my adoptive family or anybody else. Kind of just leave that in a place. Don't touch that.
An effective strategy. It worked.
It works for so long.
To a point.
Until you become an adolescent, and before you start to develop emotionally and sort of get involved in relationships outside the family, girlfriends and friendships. That's when it really started to show its, sort of rear its head again. Looking back now, sort of from my first relationship at the age of 17, I developed this sort of coping mechanism, if you want to call it that, that was involved massive amounts of control. Sort of going from being very quiet and very sort of subdued as a child, not depressed or anything, but just passive, I guess. But when I started having relationships, I started becoming more controlling, and eventually that did lead to sort of aggressive behaviour, which I'm ashamed of. I'm not proud of. I'm not ashamed. I wasn't doing anything deliberate. It just happened to come out.
And I mean, that's really honest of you. And like you say, I'm sure that's, looking back, you can see that clear link. But I get this. I presume at the time that there was no sense of understanding that no sense of joining those dots at all, or was it just living your life?
There's no sense of no sort of connection, because I'd been in denial so long. It was almost like if somebody had said it to me, well, this is to do with adoption and fear of rejection, and I'd flatly denied it.
Yeah.
Of course, I've always known I'm adopted. I've always known since I could understand. I'm completely at peace with that. It's fine. It's fine.
And you describe you describe your parents, your relationship with your parents as idyllic. You said you had an idyllic childhood, so you couldn't sort of say, oh, my parents were overbearing, or my parents were whatever.
No, not at all. They were wonderful. They are wonderful. and I always saw them as being the most kind, wonderful, caring people to have chosen me, to have given me the opportunities to, that I had and have. I was extremely grateful. So, it never felt like it was an issue at all.
So how did it sort of, because obviously you're in a very different place, you're obviously a bit older as well, but how did it come into focus, this idea that actually what is perhaps the foundation of some of this, the way you felt, the way you approached life, the way you protected yourself, how, what happened?
It started to come into focus actually quite late, in about 2005. I'd been in a long-term relationship, which I chose to end, and I walked away from that. And 2005, I just started looking at myself and thinking, where am I going at this point in my life? Where am I heading in terms of relationships? What do I really want? And out of the blue, I just had a desire to find out more about the sort of circumstances surrounding my adoption. Not necessarily to pursue anything, but just to understand, sort of, somebody had hinted in therapy in early 2005 that could be an issue, that it was something that maybe I needed to address.
Right.
Of course, me knowing better, no, it's not. And I think I went away from that, and it took a while to settle, to land, and to sort of sow a seed inside me. So I actually approached, I looked into this online, and I approached the place called Family Care in Nottingham, which is where I was adopted. And they were amazing. They provided an awful lot of information, and even more of these Cabbage Patch notes, which they had on their files. And they actually went away. They offered me some counselling, which I actually refused. And they went away and gathered more information for me about my biological family. And they kind of sent me a package, quite a sizable package of information.
And that's unusual, because I know a lot of adopted adults sometimes struggle to get information. There's maybe a resistance or a reluctance on the local authority or agency's part, but that wasn't yours experience.
Oh, no, I thought they were amazing. In fact, they went above and beyond. They went online, and I think my biological mum had remarried, and at that point, and her surname had obviously changed, so they couldn't find her. They couldn't find my biological father, but they did find information about my biological sister, who's a year and a half older than me. And it was actually, they provided me with a printout of a web page from Friends Reunited, which I don't think even exists anymore.
Yeah.
It was her, they said, we think we found your sister. This is the information. They provided me with this printout of her Friends Reunited profile. And I just looked at it. I was on Friends Reunited, and I'm sure I considered sending her a message, and I didn't. I just put everything into a folder and put it away, filed again.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Was there? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but was there? What was the complication? What was the reason to file it away again?
I felt that I probably had, at that point, all the information I needed.
Right.
And it sounds selfish, really, but actually, as it unfolds, it's not. It's. I think I was protecting everybody else. I felt I had all the information I needed. I didn't need to dig any further. And that's the selfish aspect. I thought, I don't need to involve anybody else. But on the flip side, I didn't want to upset anybody. My adoptive parents, and I have an adoptive sister who's 3 years younger than me as well. I didn't want to upset anybody else. And I thought, I'm an adult now. I'm not that child. I don't need answers now. I've got everything I need. Just be happy. You've had an amazing life. amazing childhood, amazing career. Just be happy. You know, a lot of people don't get as much as I got. As you said, you know, it's not easy to get all that information, and I was handed it literally, you know, a massive pack of a great big file.
It sounds quite conflicting. Even that, you know, that phrase, you know, it sounds. Or some people don't get as much as this. Be grateful, be brave, be a good boy.
Yes.
Put it back in the box.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Exactly that. Just feeling that. What right did I have to dig any deeper? I guess the element of at that age as well. I can't even remember what age I'd be at that point. 30 something. I guess I thought that everybody had, you know, got on with their lives, moved on, and I didn't know if my biological sister even knew I existed. You know, she was only a year and a half when I was born, so there's no guarantee that she would know about me.
Was she a full biological sister, or?
Yes, yeah. So I didn't know if she knew about me, and certainly at that point, I don't think I was in a position to brave contacting her. You know, sort of.
There's a lot of complicated questions there. I mean, they're very, very personal, and please don't answer. But I guess, was there not a natural curiosity trying to make sense of the circumstances? How, you know, what has gone on here? Was that not enough to keep you going, or was it was it overwhelming to sort of just file it away again?
I think my desire and need to protect everybody else was stronger than my own selfish needs. At that time, my sort of desire and need to protect my adoptive family was stronger.
I'm really intrigued by that word selfish, because I'm really struggling with it, because I can't see that as a selfish.
The thought that it was kind of I selfishly thought, yeah, it's a bit of a dichotomy, isn't it? It's a strange thing to say. I felt selfish in that I was looking for that information.
But it's not, is it?
No, it's natural, isn't it? It's normal.
And
it's just as people research their own family trees, you know, and DNA, whatever, you know, it's not selfish at all. It's completely normal.
Yeah, I mean, I'd maybe go even stronger than normal and saying that actually it's your right.
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, it's true. You know, it's only when people say things like that you become really strongly aware of just how much you've denied things to yourself, to everybody else, how deep the denial runs. You know, where you put this deep down through fear of upsetting everybody else. But in saying that, the fear of upsetting somebody else is actually selfishness, because you don't want them to reject you.
Yeah.
You're scared of upsetting them, because you then open it up for them to say, well, you've really hurt me. You know, you've really been selfish. You really hurt me. And I'm, you know, essentially rejecting you again.
And did the adoptive... did your adoptive parents know you'd sort of discovered this information and been looking?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've always been a very open book with my adoptive family. I've always... You know, they actually said many years ago when I was a teenager, they said, look, if you want to find your biological family, we'll help you. We'll do everything we can to help you. You know, no problem at all. And even then I was stubborn. I said, no, I don't want to know anything. I was very definite. I remember it. I remember the conversations. No, you're my parents. You've given me an amazing life. Thank you. I'm fine.
But having described yourself and how your worldview, you could have never have said yes. Almost.
That's right.
And so it's not that they did anything wrong.
Never. No, it was never an option for me to say yes at that point. It just never. No, I just absolutely locked down on it.
Yeah.
Didn't stop me wondering about them, you know, my biological family and my biological sister, but I just didn't go there. I didn't let myself go there. I guess in kind of my imagination, I wondered what they looked like, what they were doing, where they were, hoping that they're okay. Again, wanting everybody to be happy and fine, but just some part of me wouldn't let me go there. For my own protection as much as everybody else's, just don't open that kind of worms. It's knowing what I knew from my notes, they gave me up for a very good reason. They already had one child. They didn't feel they could care for me. In the notes, it said that they didn't feel they could care for me, and they wanted me to have a better opportunity, a better life with a loving family. And fortunately, that's exactly what I had and have had. But even so, there's always a doubt in the back of your mind. They might not want to know you. They might not want anything to do with you. Anybody can write anything in notes, can't they? But the truth could be much darker, much more sinister.
So it's no real answer, is it? It's words on a page that could be anybody's version of events.
Absolutely, anybody could have been written for them by the adoption agency. Just to fill in, to tick a box.
It paints them in a positive light.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, because we haven't got the end of the story, so I don't know. But but I guess that you can interpret that any way you want, can't you?
Yes. Yeah. I think my sort of natural protective instinct, my cautious sort of nature, prevented me from even wanting to find out at that point. I still, as an adult, I still felt very much like a child at that point. That didn't want to open that door.
So you kept the door shut, and what was the sort of what progressed?
What progressed? I mean, I've hinted at this already. I've had quite a few years of anxiety and depression, which have bubbled up, in varying degrees. What happened was it just got worse and worse and worse. Anxiety, panic attacks, complete fear, constant fear of losing control, often surrounding, relationships. I got into sort of a couple of brief relationships which completely failed because of controlling, needy, behavior, fear of rejection, fear of losing control, fear of everything. I eventually, 2008, I met my partner now, and we've been together since then. And I found my soulmate.
Right.
I found a kindred spirit. She was having issues at the time. Her dad was an alcoholic, and she was going through terrible emotional issues. 4 months into our relationship, he passed away. And that kind of just created a bond between us, which hasn't been broken. We've just become stronger and stronger, sort of out of something so tragic, and two very fragile people have actually created something very, very strong.
And were you open with her? Because you talk about, you sort of described this person prior to that as someone who sort of stored everything away nice and neat. But was there a shift in you, having sort of opened this and then restored it? Were you different? Were you able to connect or share that with her?
Something with her, I just felt completely. I just felt completely able to be me, and not to feel I needed to hide anything. Not that I've ever really felt that need. As I say, I've been an open book all of my life, where possible.
Yeah.
It was only sort of when I met her that I then began to open up more and talk more about issues, surrounding my adoption, and sort of learning about her life. And when you listen to other people's problems and family stories, you soon realise that maybe yours isn't so bad. And part of me started to gain an acceptance, that I'd been through a traumatic episode as a child, as a baby, But then I'd had an amazing life, and I guess acceptance started to kick in, where I'd found a person who could love me for me, accept me as I am, and I could do the same with her. And that sort of started to build this foundation, a strong foundation,
Right.
of trust, of loyalty. With her, I've never felt the need to question her or to doubt her with regards to the relationship. I've always felt very secure in this relationship. She's 12 years younger than me. She's incredible. She was actually born very premature, and as a result of that, she was actually put on life support, and she's very lucky to be. We're all very lucky that she's here.
Right.
She was starved of oxygen at birth, and actually, at the age of 24, she discovered that she actually has mild cerebral palsy. And again, something in me, I don't know, I just have such admiration for her. She's incredible. She works incredibly hard. She's a really kind, loving person. And all of this together, it just feels like I've finally found somebody who I can be myself with and completely relate to. We don't have to try hard to be together.
So that sounds like a platform that was very different for you to then reconsider adoption, your experience and the impact of that.
It's true. Yeah. She's sort of always said as well, if you feel the need to find your biological family, then she would support me all the way. She'd do everything she could to help. And again, I said, no, that's fine. We'll just place that, in the file and come back to it if we ever need to. And we left it for 12 years.
Right.
Until very recently, until just before Christmas.
So I know that's very current. What led to that moment where you go, right, actually we're gonna start open the file again. We're gonna make some movement.
It's the craziest story, really, because we were looking at buying gifts for my gift to my parents, my adoptive parents. We were looking at gifts, and they have a dog which they rescued a few years ago. We had one first, and then they rescued a dog as well, and we were fascinated to know what sort of. He's a bit of a mongrel, and we were just fascinated what breeds he has in him, and so we ordered a DNA test for him.
Right.
Just really just wanted to get an idea of what breed he is, and we ordered one for our little dog as well. I just said out of the blue, I said, I'd love to do one of these for me. I'd love to know what I've got, in my heritage. And I kind of looked into DNA, human DNA tests, and that's a bit of a rabbit hole. You can get it's really expensive. And I just jokingly said, it'd be actually cheaper to find my biological family, wouldn't it? At which point my other half had to pop out, and I went onto Facebook, and looking back in my little file, I just got the notes out, and I got my biological sister's name, and I just typed it into Facebook search, and hers was the first profile that popped up.
Wow.
And I'm just now looking at this, and there's a picture of her with what appeared to be her husband, and that was him. And within half an hour, I sort of composed a message, but I didn't send it to her. It was sent to her husband.
Right.
Because I thought, just in the back of my mind, does she know about me? Has she ever known about me?
Yeah, of course.
She wanted to hear from me if she did know. So I sent a message to her husband just explaining who I was, and did this mean anything to him. I mentioned, the name of my biological parents. 5 minutes hadn't gone by when he replied. He said, "I'm so glad to hear from you. Your sister's been searching for you virtually all your life." Incredible.
Yeah, I'm just trying to sort of imagine you sitting there and that message coming. But imagine you sitting there and sending it, not knowing what you're sending or what response, if any, you're going to get, and then to get that response.
Honestly, I didn't expect a response. I didn't realistically, I guess part of my self-defense mechanism was don't expect anything, just
set your expectations low.
Very much so, yes, yeah. And I just looked at the message, and how you can see on the app somebody's typing back, and I thought, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You don't know. Most people have got their sort of privacy settings, so it goes to a different inbox anyway. It doesn't normally land in your inbox, So I expect it to maybe sit there for months, if not years, if not forever. And then to see the 3 little dots flashing up, somebody's typing, and then to get that message. And
you describe that in really palpable terms. I can envisage that. That's a moment.
But even then, when he replied and said that, she's been searching for you most of your life, even then, there was a doubt in me. I thought,
right.
Yeah, okay, let's just make sure you are who you are, who you say you are, because I've heard about, people inheriting phone numbers, when a phone number's not been used, a mobile number's not been used for 2 years, apparently it gets recycled. I've heard stories about people ringing these numbers and somebody stringing them along thinking it was, some long-lost family or relative or whatever.
Yeah.
So I did sort of ask a few questions, I just dropped a few little subtle questions in there. Well, who's this? So-and-so names begin with D. And of course he replied, he got the answers right. He passed the test. And that sounds a bit devious, but I just needed to know it was for real.
It seems like an appropriate... Yeah, it does sound, with hindsight, it looks petty, but I would imagine in the middle of all that, this is massive stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to get it right. Is. You can't...
Having had years of anxiety and issues with panic and anxiety disorder, I just suddenly felt really calm. And I felt no anxiety or fear. I just felt immediately calmed and safe and settled as soon as I got the sort of answers that this is genuine. And he said, I've got to go, and he's a taxi driver, and she was out shopping. He says, I'm going to go to meet her now. We're going to meet, and I'm going to get her to call you. So literally within 30 minutes of that first message, I was talking to my biological sister.
I mean, where do you start though? I mean, you've had knowledge of her for by then a decade or so more.
I've had knowledge of her forever.
Yeah.
Since I could understand.
Right.
I've had knowledge of her more, knowledge of her obviously since 2005. Yeah.
Yeah. But where do you start? What's
just... Do you know what? The conversation was as natural as any conversation I could have had with a long-lost friend. It just completely flowed. There was no hesitancy. There was no nerves, no anxiety. Just felt like we picked up where we left off.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like I was talking to my twin. Although we're a year and a half apart, she just, I don't know, we were finishing each other's sentences completely naturally. The conversation just flowed, and I just felt like I'd never been away from her.
So that must be the best possible outcome.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
And so what?
Yeah,
what did you do then? What?
Well, of course, we went through the whole, what have you been doing for all these years, and then started to sort of get on to family, and turns out my, where I've been brought up, we'd never been that far away from each other. We would have sort of grown up very close in the same areas. I'd actually, as a sort of young adult, I'd lived on similar streets to them, sort of the neighbourhood. So I could have bumped into them at any time. One of my adoptive mum's biggest fears was that I would go into Nottingham, the city I was born in, and actually bump into my biological sister not knowingly, and have a relationship or something.
Not an unreasonable fear.
No, and actually it turns out that, our paths must have crossed many, many times over the those years, those formative sort of adult, young adult years. But so, we sort of started to learn a lot about, a lot more about each other, fill in the massive gaps. But it kind of just, at that point, it felt like the story was finally being told, without me having to write the script on my own.
Someone was
That's what I've been
sort of ending the sentences for you and making sense of that. And what about your adoptive parents? Were they aware of that? Did you, and your adopted sister?
I told them straight away. Yeah, I told them straight away. Just, as I say, just being open is the most important thing, really. I didn't actually have any fear that it would hurt them.
Right.
Now my adoptive parents are in their 80s. They're at an age where we respect they're coming, sort of to the later years in their life, and I think they've known what I've been through, with all these years of suffering with my mental health. I think their priority is that I'm settled and sorted, and I think it would override any feelings of fear, of me finding my biological family. I think they're just delighted.
They sound secure and sort of comfortable in their own skin.
They're wonderful people, and I mean, they're just. To adopt a child that's not your, to adopt a child is, I think, is heroic. I just think it's the most incredible thing. I have the highest respect for anybody who can adopt a child, but then to bring them up in such a way, to give them everything when there's no obligation to. There's no blood tie, there's no biological connection, but to be so selfless. And then, at that age, then to find out that I found my biological family and be completely fine with it and be completely accepting and be so completely thoughtful and lovely, just amazing. I just couldn't ask for more,
Yeah.
You hear a lot of horror stories about things like this. You hear, the Jeremy Kyle stories, that, lost families and all this, and I just feel very, very fortunate to have two wonderful families, really.
Yeah. So you what was the next step after that? Did you actually move to a physical sort of reunification? Did you go and meet her? And
she came to meet me, actually. She came. She actually just one Saturday out of the blue. She rang up. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just." My other half's got horses, so she'd gone down to see them, and actually, I think she was on call that weekend. She was having a crazy weekend on call, and my sister just rang. She said, "Can we just pop down? They're only an hour away." I said, "Yeah, of course you can." And they turned up. That was it. So my other half was flying in and out of the house, sort of in between calls and things, and it was all a bit sudden and a bit crazy, but again, it felt completely natural. It felt like we've never sort of been apart.
Wow. And then
just she's always been there.
And what was she sort of communicating to her parents? Was she, were they aware that, your biological parents, were they aware that contact had happened?
My biological father's no longer on the scene. We don't know where he is. Right. My biological parents split up in the early 90s, and he went off. I don't know where he is now, if he's still around. But yeah, she told my biological mum, and she, very shocked, of course, very, very shocked.
Yeah.
And I think she needed some time to process this. While I think she was very happy for my sister and I to sort of get acquainted and to, to sort of put everything in place, I guess, and make sure we were okay before she wanted to sort of meet me and to speak to me. I think my sister had always been searching for me, and it was almost my biological mum gave her sort of priority, to set things straight in her mind first.
Right.
which I think is lovely. She could have been really selfish and said, no, I want to talk to him first. But no, she said, you two get to know each other and kind of take your time. And it's in that process, it gave her time to sort of gather her thoughts and pick everything up from the huge kind of crazy emotional storm that really, it whips up.
Yeah. And so have you gone on to meet your mum?
Yeah. Yes, I have. Yeah, I met her 2 weeks later, just 2 weeks later, and it was, again, just felt completely natural, completely. I think you imagine something like this to be almost too much to bear, too emotional, too overwhelming, and I think for some people it can be, but I think for me, I just felt this massive sense of acceptance.
Yeah.
And it's given my biological mum an opportunity to explain the reasons behind having to give me up for adoption.
Right.
Which has just further, sort of reaffirmed everything.
Because you did have some knowledge, didn't you? But has she sort of filled that in, or was the account that you'd been given, was that true?
What she basically said, basically what happened was my biological father, he was absolutely adamant he didn't want me.
Right.
He didn't want children at all. He wanted me to be aborted. He didn't care what happened to me. He just wanted me to be got rid of. And he absolutely forced her to either, have me aborted or given up for adoption. And thank goodness she chose the latter, But I don't want to come across. I don't want to bring in a real negative to it. But I just want to sort of kind of resolve it, saying that it's given her an opportunity to almost clear her, explain her side of the story as well. Because it's not just about my story, is it? I mean, it is. There's a lot of people involved here. That, it is her. It can sound very, when you're talking as an adoptee, you can sound very, very selfish, almost a bit like poor me, and I don't want to sound like that.
No, well, you don't, and in fact, in talking to you, you can see there's a nervousness about that, and that. But it is your story.
It is, yeah. I think I just like to just put it out there that I understand, maybe that I understand the reason, that she had to do what she had to do. It was tough for her. Yeah, it's been tough for me, but it's tough for all of us involved, It's tough for some people to even have to listen to this kind of thing, it's...
Yeah.
I guess that's the protector in me, isn't it?
It feels, I mean, I'm conscious that it's really present. We're not talking about a historic event of 5 or 10.
No.
We're talking weeks ago, aren't we?
Yes, we are, yeah. Yeah, and it's just every day it just seems more and more natural. It just seems more and more. It feels like a huge emotional weight has lifted off. It feels like for all of us are saying, even my adoptive parents and adoptive sister, they're saying the same. It feels like a huge emotional weight is lifting.
That's interesting that everyone feels a similar sort of like this unspoken thing or this unresolvable thing is now is kind of out in the open. It's there.
Yes, yeah. Going from years of not discussing it, not that I was unable to discuss it, but just that I didn't feel the need, or it was always an option for me to go there, but I never chose to go there. But now I have. It feels like everybody is on board. They always would have been, I think. It just needed for me to open the door.
Yeah. So thinking about where you are now, what is do you have hopes and aspirations for the future? Do you think like that, or are you just... What's going on?
I think what's happened is, I think it strengthened all of us. I think it strengthened both families. My adoptive sister actually found her biological siblings about 10 years ago.
Right.
Her story is quite different. She didn't she didn't know who her biological father was, and her biological mum had died just a few years prior to them, to her reuniting with her siblings. And she didn't quite get the resolve, I don't think, that she may have hoped for. But I feel that I've absolutely got this amazing resolve, and I feel that the families now will just become very strong. It feels like we've just gone from, my adoptive parents don't have siblings, so I didn't have grow up with any cousins or, a big family. It was just my parents, my adoptive sister and grandparents, and that was us, But now it feels like the family suddenly expanded and strengthened. I feel we're all moving forward in an incredible new chapter.
Well, that seems like a really appropriate place to say thank you very much. I've taken up a lot of your time, and
It's a pleasure.
you've been really generous with your story and your time, and so thank you very much for talking to us, and perhaps you could come back in the future and tell us the next chapter.
Glad to. Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you very much.